So thank you, Jasmijn de Boo, for coming on to Future Foods interviews. Jasmine, you are the global CEO of ProVeg, which is working to accelerate the transition to a sustainable global food system. So could you just sort of take a moment to introduce yourself and the work of ProVeg?
Yes, of course, and thank you for having me. It's great to be on the podcast. Yes, I'm Jasmijn de Boo from the Netherlands originally. We just spoke about that briefly, and I've been in the UK for pretty much 21 years now, living all over the place. And we at ProVeg work all remotely, so we have teams based everywhere. There are a few countries where there are actual physical offices, like in the Netherlands and Germany and a couple of others, but most people work remotely. So that makes it quite a unique organization. We already did that before COVID. And yeah, ProVeg International is the food awareness organization. We aim to accelerate the transition towards a more plant-forward diet, a plant-forward food system, I should say, and accelerating plant-based and cultivated meat as alternatives. And we have been in existence for about 9 years, now in nearly 14, 15 countries. So we've grown a lot in that time. And yeah, we are actually really active in very different areas in each country, depending on the need and the cultural context. So we don't necessarily have everything the same way that you replicate everywhere, but we follow, yeah, where the kind of gaps are in the market, and that's where we play.
Okay, so ProVeg has been around for 9 years. Have you been with ProVeg that whole time, or have you?
Almost 8 years.
Okay, and where
Yes.
were you before? What's your how's your background brought you to ProVeg?
Yeah, it's so I've basically known for a long time I wanted to help animals. I became vegetarian when I was 12. It's like that aha moment. I then studied animal topics for about 6 years, reading Peter Singer's Animal Liberation, of course, further cemented that feeling like I need to help animals. And I started campaigning in 1999 to help abandoned and neglected sled dogs in Greenland, in Canada, just after finishing my master's degree in animal welfare. And that was back then the only degree in that field from the University of Edinburgh. Had only been established in the mid 90s, so it was a very new pioneering field. And of course, we know that like 25 years ago, food system change or effective altruism was not yet a thing, that didn't really exist yet. But I did think we needed to work at all levels. And so in terms of kind of how that shaped my career, I felt like we needed to get change in education, our political system, in the media. And when the Dutch Political Party for the Animals was formed in 2002, I thought that's interesting. That's where I can make a difference. And I was one of the first volunteers to set up a division in the Netherlands of the whole southern Netherlands, 3 provinces, to act and campaign on political issues for animals. And I also participated in the 2004 EU elections. Was number 5 on the list, and that campaigning kind of really put me into a bigger picture mindset of systems change, and it led to me later leading and launching a similar party here in the UK in 2006.
Ah, what was the party?
Well, back then it was called Animals Count, but since it's been renamed to Animal Welfare Party, and it's still in existence, there's a local councillor, and I'm not involved anymore. I kind of stepped out of it in 2010, thinking, I'm not British, it needs to be led by British people. So it's been going for the last 15, 16 years, contesting various elections. But it's of course very difficult in this climate. The first past the post system is not that easy to win seats. But the Netherlands has done really well, and it inspired a global kind of movement of other parties for animals around the world, including some elected MPs in Australia and other countries. And I think that kind of really, yes, set the scene 20, 25 years ago for effective change and working at that systematic level. Yeah.
Okay, very interesting. So the work of ProVeg, it's it's focusing on the food system, but is that with an environmental objective in mind, or is it kind of animal welfare, or are there other, uh, um, you know, kind of inciting reasons?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think we started off with the 5 pros. That it is tasty and good for all people. So tasty, delicious, healthy for people and the environment and animals. So 5 pros. Um, but we're not really talking that much about animals. Because what we found is that animal groups do that already, but when you do that, sometimes the doors get closed. And we talk more about the other arguments for health and taste, and food security is now, of course, a big topic. And we need to make sure that countries are food sovereign as well, that they have the means to produce their own food and not too reliant on imports and volatile market disruptions. So I think we just use the arguments that are relevant and effective. But of course, we all try to make a shift in that helps all the different beneficiaries.
Yeah. So the sale of plant-based foods generally has sort of slowed recently, I suppose. There was a boom, wasn't there, sort of 2019, 2020, certainly with investments, but it's sort of slowed more recently. Do you think that's a sort of a temporary slowdown, or do you think that is something we should be worried about?
Yeah, it's actually an interesting development. I think it's a tale of 2 stories, basically. So hot that it's not yet off the press. We're working on some new research that shows that the plant-based market is actually entering a consolidation phase and more maturing and less, it's not dying off. And just today in Food Navigator, there was a similar article actually showing that it's consolidating and it's not stalling. But there's this current decline to some extent, but it's also continuing to grow globally. And they actually predicted will be growing by 15.5% up to 2035. And we've just done a deep dive as well ourselves, looking at the market signals, and it's been a heavy investment phase, and now we see much more of a discipline phase and mergers that make sure that those products that are most exciting and interesting to people stay on the market. And it's also very kind of geographically diverse. So, for example, in the US, we have seen that there's a bit more of a struggle with particular brands struggling, even sometimes going under. But the European market, Asia, is still actually doing quite well. So I think there's definitely hope.
Yes, your colleague Tim told me that 50% of people are reducing their meat. I think that was the statistic, which was an interesting one.
Yeah, again, it differs in different markets, but that's probably the case. Yeah, UK, Netherlands, Germany. It's really kind of flexitarian patterns are the ones that drive the food sales, right? And also the repeat sales, because they like the products, they are becoming more familiar with them, and the food environment, I think, is now much more friendly than it was, say, 5 or 10 years ago, when you had to really go out of your way to find something. And now it's everywhere on every menu. The supermarkets have lots of choice. You don't need like 15 different types of kind of plant-based burger. I think that's overwhelming for people. But if you have a few choices, that's what people like. And I think that doesn't mean that there's definitely a decline and it's all doom and gloom.
I suppose it doesn't always translate. If people are eating more plant-based food, that doesn't necessarily mean they're eating less meat.
Yeah, that's true. We do see that. There's a bit of an issue sometimes. I think, yeah, definitely people are including it more in their diets, becoming more familiar with it. But as you said, sometimes the meat consumption overall is not kind of decreasing. And we see that around the world, there's, of course, global population growth. There's aspiring in nations that are becoming more affluent and are looking at these diets as something as a status symbol. And there's marketing budgets, huge astronomical budgets, and lobby groups that push the nutrition narrative. So all of these arguments are going against what we should be doing. But then I think that we should be very hopeful and yeah, I think looking at what's happening as well is that lots of governments are now investing into more plant-based policies and innovation. Dietary guidelines around the world are becoming much more plant-forward. Eat Lancet, the planetary health diet is inspiring lots of other nations to change their guidelines. So it has this ripple effect. And I think it will take a bit longer, but overall, I think we're moving in the right direction.
Hmm. So if you had to pick one policy change that would most accelerate the shift towards plant-based diets in the UK, what would that be?
Yeah, that's a tricky one because there's no silver bullet, is there? I think there's what would help the most, I think, is a national food strategy, a comprehensive strategy that would really accelerate plant-rich diets at all the different angles and levels. But that would be more longer-term plan. So I think what we could look at, for example, is mandatory protein split reporting, or at least a coordinated total sector voluntary commitment, as we're seeing in the Netherlands. I don't know if you've probably seen that, right? That all the retailers there have signed up to these protein split reporting mechanisms. And no,
Oh, I didn't know about that. No.
so that's super interesting. So
Yeah.
that's something that ProVeg Netherlands was also behind. And now 9 out of 10 major supermarkets have signed up to that. So they're going to go from like 60% animal-based to 40% over time. And we're measuring that through, the right kind of standardized reporting methods, and we publish that. It becomes more of an accountability thing. And as I said, if all of the retailers contribute, then there's no kind of disadvantage, because if you're one lone voice and you go ahead and the rest of the competition is not following, then you're kind of at a disadvantage. But here, if you all bring people together, and I think this is the government possibility to kind of really show that this is, de-risking business decisions, future-proofing the decisions, but it needs to kind of have a bit of a vision and leadership, and it's stalling here in the UK, I think, because of a bit of inertia, a bit of like not knowing where to start. But I think it would be a very effective, effectively cost-free policy for the government.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting that that's happening in the Netherlands. The Netherlands seem to kind of lead the way a lot in these areas. I wonder why. I've spoken with Madre Brava. They work with the supermarkets as well in the US to try and change their plant-based stock. What's in it for the supermarkets?
So basically, so sometimes they have been making kind of more marginal, more margins on these products, right? So that this is a business model that can really pay off for them. And we're now also looking into doing this research into what this means for supermarkets. But it's mainly that they can actually have a better income. They have less volatility with supply sources, sometimes driving up the meat prices, for example, and then they're having to adjust. They sometimes don't even make that much money on these products, and they stand with products below almost cost. So there is definitely a business case for the supermarkets, and of course it's what consumers are asking for. And as this trend of flexitarianism is increasing, people want to have nice, tasty products. So what they're doing is, especially in the Netherlands, Albert Heijn, they're really innovating in products and doing that all in-house. And they were the market leader, and lots of them have followed. And I think this is really, kind of contagious, I would say, that people are normalizing the concept and just rewarding, I think, innovation. And that's I think now we're seeing in the UK that Tesco is also starting to see, again, a bounce back. And that will, I think, have a positive effect on all the other supermarkets in the years to come as well.
Yeah. I know you talked about a food strategy. I know that there was one mooted, wasn't there? I think, was it 23? But because of political kickback, they had to sort of change their they had to scrap it essentially. So do you think it's kind of political reasons? You know, it's slightly polarized, isn't it? They're kind of reducing meat, especially in the UK. So how do you engage with people who feel that reducing meat consumption is somehow like a threat to their culture.
Yeah, that's another interesting one. And I think you're right about polarization. I think that actually started almost 10 years or more ago when we had Brexit and all the polarizing arguments. I think that kind of entrenched their culture of pitting one against the other. And yeah, I think it's really important that we take culture seriously. Of course, yeah, we have helped certain meat-heavy dishes make exciting in terms of plant-based versions, but we also recognize that some of the plant-centered cultures that used to have mostly plants have now been displaced and been suppressed by kind of animal farm systems and meat-heavy diets. So it's not so much that we have always eaten that much meat and that was the default. We've only introduced that after the Second World War, right? That's when it got all promoted as initially kind of food security and nutritional security, but it just took off in a major way, which was not sustainable, and it's not the natural kind of default that we've always been like. And I think we've also seen a lot of cultures adapting to novel adaptations. For example, if you look at Asia, then you see tofu and seitan and those products mimicking animal products, and that's been the case for much longer than we've been doing that in the West. So I think these cultures, it's not necessarily inherently threatening to cultures to have more plant-rich diets.
Mm. Yeah. So, and you've been working in the UK specifically with schools to try and encourage a shift, I suppose, at a younger age. How is that? How is that working? Are you finding that successful?
Yeah, I think it's really successful. So just in 2025 alone, we've actually delivered more than 25 million meals, meat-free or plant-based, from the school system. And the total now stands at 72 million meals. So I think that's really phenomenal, to be honest. And more than 12,000 schools are part of the program. We have a School Plates Award program, and the caterers are a little bit competitive and they want to kind of improve and have a bit of peer competition. So we have, awarded 52 awards last year. And yeah, all in all, we've reached about 4,500 participants, including the adults, the caterers, but also children last year. And they really like it because they love the kind of planet days, and they're much more clued up on what's happening to the planet. And we used to be right at that age, we had no idea. And these days, they ask for it. They ask for more planet-friendly food. And yeah, it's also really good that it's normalizing this as an option on the menu. We're not taking options and choice away, we're just adding it. And it doesn't mean that people have to miss out on something or that you're the only veg kid in the class like I used to be. And it's just a normal thing to have as part of the menu.
And do you think it's a generational shift? So, I mean, have you found in your research that kind of younger people are more likely to adopt a plant-based diet?
Yeah, generally speaking, I think, as I said, that they are much more aware of the environmental problems in particular, but also food justice is becoming an important argument for people to not want to, contribute to that. And there's certain role models, of course, like Billie Eilish and others who kind of people look up to, and I think they are much more aware of their food choices, and they will be the drivers of that change. But now what we see, I think it's also kind of mellowed out a bit, and we see much more interest also across millennials and other age groups. Maybe the baby boomers least so, perhaps still, but I think the rest is really catching up and getting more and more interested in more plant-based food. But the way we work is not so much at kind of inspiring individuals, because that's what other organizations do. So we really try to make the food environment more appealing, attractive, tasty, affordable. We've also worked a lot on price parity, for example, in supermarkets. And we see that now in Germany, the Netherlands, a basket of food with plant-based products is cheaper than one with animal products. So it's really, making sense for people to kind of buy that more. And that has to be the case, because otherwise you're not going to get repeat purchases.
Yeah. But globally, meat consumption is still rising.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, what gives you confidence that meaningful change in this area is possible or likely? I mean, you've talked about the kind of, the adoption of the younger of school age people. I mean, clearly that's a positive thing to look forward to in the future. Is there anything else that kind of gives you hope that kind of meaningful change is going to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said before, I think the dietary guidelines are changing, governments are investing, and there's innovation happening at all levels. Germany has actually decreased its animal consumption by 10% in the last 10 years. So again, showing it can be done if you invest in it and if you have a vision. They were the first to kind of focus on renewable energy. Now they also have this to show that it works in real life. Denmark has a national action plan, and I think they're starting to see that shift. So it does need to come from the top. There needs to be government, retail, public food, public procurement change, and that is happening. It's all happening. So I think it's not a matter of if, but when, and how can we accelerate it. And I think the reason we've been so successful is because other organizations are seeing the need now as well, for environmental reasons, for people's health. So we're getting much more other ancillary organizations and companies interested in doing something about food systems. It works at every level, basically.
Yes. It was only Denmark, wasn't it, that were actively implementing the food roadmap from the Paris Agreement 2023, maybe.
Well, 2015, of course, we had the Paris
Yes.
Agreement, and then they took several years, but they really listened to all the different stakeholders. They brought them together across the political spectrum, the farmers, all the different voices, the food procurement people, and they actually reached consensus that something had to be done, and that it would be beneficial for the whole country, for the sector, to actually invest in this. And again, not talking about, oh, we must also, reduce the number of animals we keep, but we need to make it more sustainable, and we need to add in more legumes, and we need to do more innovation at that level. How can we stimulate the growth in plant-based production and everything? So it's a really holistic plan, also aligned with their organic ambitions, because they are more strongly focused on that. And it all really influences how people perceive food. And now they've set up a diplomacy kind of unit, and the MPs and the MEPs are going to other countries to talk about what they did. And it's really, again, I mentioned before, contagious. Now Portugal is starting a national protein strategy plan. And of course, in the Netherlands, we already saw that the nitrogen issues had to be resolved. So there's already commitment there from the government to focus also on food. And I think, Germany is invested in alternatives. The UK has invested a bit in alternatives. So I think it's becoming much more of part of business.
Yeah. Do you think, though, on the whole, the UK is lagging a little bit?
Yes. Yeah, on the whole, it is. The narratives are just not made public. It's all kind of done behind the scenes, which understandable, but we've got to talk about it because it's necessary. The last food security report that came out just a few weeks ago, showing that we're going to get real problems with food and social unrest and everything, that should really be a wake-up call. I mean, we've had so many wake-up calls, haven't we? Biodiversity loss. We're one of the most nature-depleted countries in Europe. Food security problems, farmers going out of business, committing suicide because they just don't have a lifeline. And we need to help farmers because they are the ones that actually produce the food. And we already published a report 4 years ago, 2022, in terms of amplifying the farmers' voices. And I think this is really important because without them, we're not going to get any transition. And it worked in Denmark, so why could it not work here in the UK, right?
Yes, absolutely. They persuaded the farmers in Denmark, and and they're all behind it. It's about, they have incentives. It's the kind of carrot and stick
Yes.
uh,
Yeah.
application there, isn't it? Is that something that we could use sort of similarly in the UK then, do you think?
Yeah, and the other thing that the government could do is public procurement, because I didn't even know, but I just had some figures looked up, and it's about £6 billion of money worth per year that goes into schools and hospitals and prisons, the public system, and that's huge. So the government could use its spending power on making that more sustainable and plan forward. And again, it doesn't need to be 100% change. It can be just gradual and adding more choice and making it the default option and all these kind of proven tactics to make it much more available to people. And that takes also the kind of individual owners away, but you give them an incentive, you give people choice. So I think the government really should be looking at those kind of options to implement.
Okay. So where are you seeing ProVeg having the greatest success around the world?
Yeah, that's also interesting. So I think China is really something that we should keep an eye on, because the national policy is actually saying that they want to invest in neoprotein. They call it neoprotein, for food security reasons and food sovereignty reasons. And we are the only kind of registered NGO in China in this space. And we're working with the government, universities, major national, multinational companies to focus on food innovation. And there's this joint vision, and there's just been a report with the 10 biggest problems and barriers, and now we're going to do a report with the 10 opportunities, and that translates already into real funding opportunities. So one of the things that we highlighted in that report has now already been put in a call for proposals to address by the government, and I think we should really keep an eye on this space. And the EU is starting to slowly get its act together, I think, but it's also undermining itself. We've just seen the destructive denomination debates and decisions, so that's not very helpful at all. The Biotech Act is a good step in the right direction, but again, also a missed opportunity, because the novel foods are not going to be getting any sandboxes, regulatory sandboxes like they do here in the UK. And I think this is one area where, and probably the only one I would say, where UK can benefit from Brexit. They don't have to follow the EU rules on novel foods. So if the UK really invests heavily in those regulatory sandboxes, we could be ahead of the EU with our food tech and food innovation. So yeah, it's just I think as I mentioned, individual member states like the Netherlands, Denmark, Portugal, Germany, they're really starting to take the lead, and that's really promising.
Yeah. So with the sandbox, that's more focused on sort of cultivated meat and
Yes, and precision fermentation as well. I think both of those are just so important and have such impact potential, and we need to invest in those and not just. It's just ridiculous that we've banned the use of words for a product that doesn't even exist yet, right? In which other sector does that happen? It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, how important do you think it is? I mean, obviously, it is important to have government backing and to have investment, but do you think it can happen without sort of government support? Do you think that this transition can be just from the private sector?
Well, of course, the private sector needs to play its role too. In the beginning, as you said, like 2016 onwards, we saw much more of boom and investment in alternative proteins, and that was very much venture capital led. And they didn't see the return on investment because these trajectories take much longer than tech. Food tech is not the same as IT tech, and I think that's where the mistakes were made. But we need to unlock the kind of government funding to then also lock in the corporate funding from the private sector, because that's where the billions and trillions are. And they are doing it to some extent, but I think it needs to be in lockstep together. And like, if the government incentivizes it, then the corporate sector will also put in a lot more. And I think that's where we need that kind of joined up thinking and vision.
Mm. So what is the sort of moral um, sort of policy at ProVeg? I mean, are you pro-vegan, or is that not an important part of your policy?
Yeah, it's a good question. People ask us, are we a vegan organization? No, not directly. So we really want to see a shift in the total, towards more plant-forward food systems. And we do that primarily through promoting plant-based options, but also occasionally vegetarian as a kind of interim step, or hybrid or blended products. We understand that they're an important tool in the toolkit. And we need to see the whole kind of sector moving in that direction. So a lot of us personally are driven by, animal or environmental reasons, and maybe vegetarian, vegan, but we are not going to say, everyone needs to become vegan, because that's not the pragmatic approach that works. We want to see actual results.
Yeah. And do you find that if you label something, the labeling of products is very important. So if there's a plant-based product and it's labeled vegan food, how do you think that impacts on consumer perception?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think countless studies show that if you call it plant-based, it's more appealing. But it depends a little bit on the country and the context. So, as I said before, Germany, there's been such a big push into labeling and vegetarian vegan products that there it works really well to have the V label on the product, and that people can quickly identify it. But in the UK, in the US particularly, plant-based is much more, for everyone, rather than just a small number of vegans.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's you haven't spoken much about the USA. I know that you do have an office in the USA. You do have representation there. So, is USA going in the wrong direction, or is there hope?
It's a difficult market, isn't it? Especially, I think, the current trends there are not so great, I think. But we shouldn't forget that there's a lot of good stuff happening on the ground. And we have partners, for example, in our school food network, where organizations are working with schools across the US and doing fantastic work, and really kind of replicating what we do with the UK here in school plates. So good work is happening. It's just not as visible, I think. And in public procurement in particular, we have a lot of good examples of organizations that are active. And then there's other organizations that focus much more on the policy and on the food tech. And while that's stalling in some areas, in the federal, the options are a bit more limited. Often there you have like bills that you can attach something to, and like under a big bill you just attach something, and it can be used for good or bad reasons. Like the farm bill is kind of not so good, but then there are others where we can actually slip in a bit of money for innovation or something. And some groups are actively using that as it's how that system works, right? So they're actually more effective with that approach. I think future governments may want to kind of change again where they're heading, because it's, for sustainability reasons, not the right kind of direction. But I wouldn't be too kind of doom and gloom. There are still a lot of companies doing great stuff, and the resolve is still there.
Yeah. And in the UK, I hear that you're also doing some work with the NHS.
Yeah, so that's it's a bit hot off the press as well. So I was just there at a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and there's now a Plant First Health Coalition that focuses on this, and several organizations focused on health and public procurement coming together and showcasing great results from early interventions and pioneers in certain NHS trusts. So the next step would be to look at how can we scale that up, how can we get that across more NHS trusts. But this area is particularly in need of more funding. So if your listeners are interested in this, and they could, maybe see what they can do, perhaps, because I think it could have massive impact. And if the UK could really lead in this, would be amazing, wouldn't it?
It would.
Yeah.
So just to sort of get into the sort of nuts and bolts a little bit of how you go about influencing change. I mean, are you an organization that kind of hides in the shadows a little bit and kind of whispers in people's ears, or do you do bold campaigns with ProVeg, kind of heading it? What's your
Yeah,
strategy?
is it inside game or outside game, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we used to be more the kind of campaigning organization, and that's how we managed to get the original veggie burger ban in 2020 off the table in the EU. We had massive kind of media and petitions and all that, and that worked really well. But now we are much more of the inside game. So we in Brussels, we have policy offices there. We have lots of great contacts, and as a result, some of our wording is literally appearing in amendments and texts put forward by the Commission and by various amendments. So that's the kind of role I think we need to play at this stage of our organization. We're no longer the kind of the vocal one, but we work very closely with other organizations that do, because we need to be coordinated and have the same kind of approach, and we don't need to front that necessarily like the campaign that can be done by others these days.
Okay. And where do you get your funding from generally?
Yeah, again, that depends on the country. We're getting funding in countries from major donors, from foundations, from individuals, sometimes for services, like I mentioned before, the V label. And major foundations, that's the major source of income.
Okay. And you said you were working in collaboration with some other organizations. Are you able to name those, a
Well,
few?
you already mentioned a couple like Madre Brava, GFI, we work with WRI, WWF. This is all on the kind of retail outreach. And again, you need to be coordinated. Even if the different organizations have a slightly different take on how to approach things, you have to work together because policymakers, the retailers, getting a total headache if they get approached by 6 different organizations, right? So they'd rather be approached by one who's the representative of those 6. And for example, in the UK, we have Better Eating. So that's a massive collaboration of, I think, I can't remember now, to be honest, but something like 200 organizations.
Okay.
All coming together under this united umbrella. And that makes total sense because then we represent the people more effectively with a united voice.
Okay. Well, I've got one more question for you, Jasmine, and then I'll let you go. So looking ahead 10 years, what would meaningful success look like for ProVeg?
Yes, good question. So I think that we know that from a climate perspective, we need to take strong and long-lasting action in the next 4 years. A lot of climate scientists have said that 2030 is the year that we may reach a point of no return. So this is why we're growing fast now, and we're developing different strategies for both high consumption and low consumption regions. The global north and south are not always accurate descriptions. But we do need to see real reductions in mostly the global north, as well as, say, Brazil and South Africa, while also stopping the growth in consumption in animal-based food consumption in developing and middle-income countries. So we focus on the biggest levers of change that we see are the most effective and most impactful, which is policy, public food, corporate protein transition. And we hope that in 10 years we'll be well past peak meat and also significantly on our way to having precision fermentation and cultivated meat taking up at least a quarter or maybe more of the current animal consumption.
Yes, I spoke to Jack Bobo. He talked about peak meat as well. What year is that sort of projected at? I can't remember either. I'm sure.
No, well, originally we actually developed that idea about 8 years ago or so, and it started taking hold in some policy forums, and we were hoping that I think 2025 would have been the year, but I don't think we're there yet. So hopefully within the next 5 years.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jasmine, for coming on Future Foods Interviews. It's been wonderful talking to you, and I'll be following your progress with great interest.
Wonderful to be talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.